Part 1. How to spark new ideas and become an innovative thinker. Hi there, creative people. How are you? Let's talk about the interesting relationship between creativity and routine. Creativity is the fuel that inspires change. It stimulates growth, encourages change, and transcends traditional ideas. But just when creativity appears to be attracting the attention it deserves, it then seems harder and harder to find. Why is it? Mainly because our daily routines become stale and uninspired as we rush from one obligation to the next. This is happening on a personal level as well as on an organizational one. In logical thinking, Ken Robinson explains, we move from one idea to another through a series of rules and conventions. In order to cut across patterns, we need to use a combination of provocation and movement. Wise tip. Before you learn how to break out of your routine towards a more creative life, it is important to know that routines are a natural survival mechanism of the brain. The normal behavior of our brain is to create patterns. Here is an easy example of this. Remember your first days of driving? Every action that you took was cautious and relatively slow, right? Checking the side mirrors, fastening your seatbelt, looking backwards. Now imagine that your brain would have to go through this checklist again and again. This is exactly why the brain generates routine behaviors and patterns over time. The checklist becomes a standard routine. In this way, the brain simplifies processes and becomes more efficient. This phenomenon is also found in inanimate elements that we see in nature. These elements develop into geometrically arranged patterns, from cracked lake beds to ice and even basalt plains. Edward de Bono, the philosopher and author, describes the movement and transformation of thoughts using this beautiful analogy. When we wake up in the morning, our thoughts are random like drops falling from the sky. After a while, the brain puts these thoughts in a template-like order, and our morning drops form into runoff-like thinking patterns. So, what are your runoff-like thinking patterns? Think about it. Our thoughts and behavior settle into a dull routine. Creativity is often fueled with fresh connections that are based on non-linear thinking styles. Thus, the normal behavior of the human brain is found in a constant conflict with the demands of creativity. This may partially explain why people tend to associate creativity with geniuses, artists, or outsiders like lawbreakers, those who hold unusual creative skills. The truth of the matter is that people from these three groups often practice movement between fields using their imagination or via interdisciplinary learning practices. In the article from The Guardian, The Secret Sigmund, Jonathan Jones explains that Freud loved antiquities. His collection included hundreds of them. His inspiration came from Da Vinci, whom he admired for synthesizing science and art. This movement between fields helped creative people to break thinking patterns and make fresh connections towards breakthroughs. In his book, The Geography of Genius, a search for the world's most creative places from ancient Athens to Silicon Valley, Eric Weiner tells that ancient Athens imported ideas from different cultures such as Egypt, Babylon, and the Phoenicians. We can learn from Weiner's book that empires became empires because they learned and adopted from other empires. The empire was established on an open-minded perspective to learn from another. This is the secret recipe of creative people throughout the entire history. So what if we would add some routine breakers into our lives? Our brain is an interactive zone, guys. Diversity of feeding resources, like hobbies and fields of interest, trigger mind flexibility and generate movement in the brain. Creative techniques trigger a switch to a different thinking style, and thus patterns are being cut across. You don't have to be genius like Freud or Da Vinci. You can generate movement in your life, just like I did with my trip to the desert. The trip unfolded different feeding resources, like my photography and storytelling, that were dormant and waiting to be awakened. My experiences with the hosts in this trip inspired and generated movement in my feelings and thoughts. The result is a photography-based traveler's blog which fed you and others. Okay, let's finalize this session. In this lesson, you heard how to generate movement in your life in order to cut across thinking patterns towards creative breakthroughs. Our thoughts and behaviors settle into dull routine in the form of patterns. In this way, the brain simplifies processes and becomes much more efficient. Creativity is often fueled with nonlinear thinking styles, which is the ability to connect ideas from different spheres. Creative people often practice movement between fields using their imagination or via interdisciplinary learning practices. This movement helps them to break established thinking patterns and make fresh connections towards breakthroughs. Before you learn how to break your established thinking patterns so you can achieve great creative breakthroughs, let's get inspired by the experts. Come on.